We'll see if I emerge alive. Okay. This morning I'm going to I'm going to try to get into the following. I don't know how it'll go. One is going to be the question I had: how commonly are Jews offended to be referred to as Jews? Is it better to refer to Jews as the Jewish people? What are your thoughts on this? And I'm going to go there. The next one is about Messiah, because I dealt with it last spring, but I'm going to revisit it all over again and see what happens. At this point, I have no idea what we're going to get done. The next one I have is what happens when you die. Now, if I knew that answer exactly, I wouldn't be standing here. No. And just in case we have time, which I doubt, but maybe, I don't know what to do with it, we'll just keep it. I was asked about the structure of Christianity, which has grace and faith, and Judaism, which has good deeds. Okay? So I'm ready to explain that one too. I really don't think I can fit any more questions in it for the moment. We'll just have to store them for the future. But be that as it may, that's where I plan to go this morning. And I have a pad. If you do have questions, I will record them. I do want to start with the following, though. Both in terms because of the tragedy in Pittsburgh and then Thousand Oaks, because of the temperament that we live in and the times we live in, and because this is Veterans Day, and both my father and uncle were veterans, I do really want to, I wrote this after Charlottesville, and I'd like to share it with you this morning with your permission. It's entitled, "There's Nothing Abstract About Hatred. Love of Each Other Will Triumph." My father and my uncle were two men of the greatest generation who served in the Army of the United States of America. Neither saw combat, but they were prepared, if not for the capitulation of, and if not for the capitulation of Japan, my father was being trained to hit the beaches. He most certainly would have died. All who served knew they were not fighting for some abstract enemy. They were fighting to save the world from Nazism and fascism. They saw and read all the hate spewed forth from Goebbels and the Nazi propaganda machine about the inferiority of other races. By the end of 1944 and the beginning of 1945, the truth of the concentration camps and the genocide of the Jews, Gypsies, those with mental disabilities, and Slavs, among others, was well known. While the United States was far from perfect, because of the trail that began even before the Civil War, but certainly that which continued after it, it was on the path that would lead to today, even as today will lead us to a more perfect union. Whenever I watch newsreels from that time, my blood curdles. What if the Nazis had not been defeated? By the way, I hope that you follow in the Times Dispatch where the television grid is, where they have the newspaper, the front page of the newspaper. I've been following it since they started it. It's been a fascinating journey for someone who was born after that. What if Japan had captured the whole Pacific, including Australia and Hawaii? What would our world be like? It is unfathomable. Millions upon millions enslaved. Millions upon more millions murdered. There is nothing abstract about hatred. In watching the report of the torch lit in Charlottesville last year, I was transported back to the time of the Nazi marches in Berlin, pyres of book burning, the flaming synagogues of Kristallnacht, which is this anniversary, Friday and Saturday past, the ashes in the still smoldering ovens of Auschwitz, and even the smoking ruins and mounds of corpses of Richmond captured in Spielberg's Lincoln. Being born in 1948 and serving in congregations for 40 years, I buried many who served and fought in World War II, as well as survivors of the Holocaust that came to the United States. They told me their stories about the war. They told me in no uncertain terms that they fought for liberty, democracy, decency, freedom, and humanity. There was nothing abstract about what they were fighting for. When my father and uncle returned from service, the United States was far from perfect, but it was and is perfectible. In the factories where my father worked throughout his life, he encountered plenty of anti-Semitism. He stood up to it in his own way, showed his sons an inner strength, but he knew that he was part of America, working, even crawling, upon a path that elevates the dignity and holiness of each human being. All my grandparents entered the United States as immigrants, passing by the Statue of Liberty with their uplifted lamp for all yearning to be free. Free from persecution, free from hunger, free from fear, free from hatred. For those immigrants, there was nothing abstract about persecution, fear, hunger, and hatred. It was real, and they felt it in the marrow of their bones. They had experienced it up front and personal. There's nothing abstract about the hatred unleashed in Charlottesville. Hate is hate. It burns into our minds and souls. After all the history of the 20th century, in the first now 18 years of this one, haven't they learned anything? I have learned about the consequences of evil when confronted by silence. In my public elementary schools, I, as a Jew, was the minority, usually only the one in the class. In my public high school, I had African-American classmates for the first time. That's how my town was structured. I was completely illiterate about their story, of their people's history. The textbooks of the 1960s, you can all just think back quickly to what you used in those days, was very inadequate. And I lived up north. I remember watching the movie Roots, where for the first time I saw the pain and agony of their people. I had seen it in movies about my people, the Jews, in the Holocaust, but I knew of no other comparable presentation of the black experience in America. Since then, there have been other movies that have filled in some of the missing pieces of my knowledge, even as I have more to learn. There was nothing abstract about the experience of slavery. There was nothing abstract about the lash of the whip, the harness in the field, and the ripping apart of families. The truth is that each group can only know and feel the pain of their personal or their people's experiences. They cannot know in the same way the pain of someone else's. Yet each group can respect and honor, sympathize and empathize with each other's story and experience. The common bond is being hated. The common bond is that there are symbols, slogans, language, and signs that ignite all the pain and pathos of the generations before us along with us. There's nothing abstract about swastikas and white hoods and torchlit parades and nooses. It might be 2018, but they are as real now as they ever were. In the Jewish tradition, Passover, Seder, the ritual and meal commemorating the Exodus from Egypt, the experience borrowed as a motif for the yearning and liberation by other peoples, we eat a green vegetable dipped in salt water. That water symbolizes the tears of the Israelites. We eat a bitter herb, usually with fresh horseradish, dipped in a mixture that represents the mortar used in constructing Pharaoh's cities. The bitter herb can give a sharp taste to literally taste the bitterness of slavery and oppression. There is nothing abstract about the Seder ritual. It is meant to make us know, even from a distance of time, the reality of hate, of being hated, of the reality of hatred. There is nothing abstract about pain. Looking forward, besides backwards, it seems to me that a critical lesson of the day is the moral imperative to understand the pain, the story, and the consequences of hating, of spewing forth hatred, presented symbols and language of vilification of others. Those who came with hatred in their hearts, in their minds, and on their lips, and in their hands, need to understand that the United States has a moral foundation that respects the holiness and uniqueness of each person, whether that be of color, of faith, of gender, of ability, of place of origin. While we are far away from the founding in the 1770s, the authors of our founding documents created an exceptional path for our development and growth, to embrace an entire diversity of the human experience. This is the United States of America. This is the country that asks for God's grace. I'll deal with that later. This is the flag to whom we pledge, we say, one nation with liberty and justice for all. There's nothing abstract about liberty and justice. We can feel it. We can share it. We can live it. Here, now, always, and for everyone. So what shall we do in these days? We need to constantly talk to each other, share our stories, and deepen our mutuality. We need to write and speak everywhere, in the newspapers, at work, in houses of worship, at the dinner table, with children and grandchildren. We need to be present in proper ways, at every rally, at every demonstration. And what do we do there? We pray, we sing, we hold hands, we repeat the truths that are self-evident. We exude love, not in the abstract, but in the concreteness of daily life. I can't answer in the theoretical about every statue that stands in this country. I can say truth and honesty, respect and honor, decency and civility will succeed. I can engrave on my heart and in my actions the biblical command, love thy neighbor as thyself. No matter how long it takes, no matter how many steps of tired marching feet, love of each other will triumph. I want to be a worthy descendant of the men who were the greatest generation and who fought for us, fought for this country. So I will never be silent. And I demand to hear this from every leader at every level of government, from the most local to the President of the United States. Okay, that one gets off my chest.
Great time.
Yeah.
Making America. Okay. I just want to reiterate, it's a privilege to be with you. And people ask me, why do I do this? And exactly because of what I just said in my remarks. The more we share, the more we know each other, the more we're able to ask questions of each other, then the better we are as human beings and the better we are as this country. So the first question I decided to tackle was, how should you call me, okay? And don't say, not me for dinner. Never late for dinner. There is a whole string of names for the Jewish people, for Jews, that come in chronological order. And I want to go in that order and then amplify. The first one is Hebrews. When you read about Abraham in the book of Genesis, it says Abraham, in Hebrew, Ha-Ivri, the Hebrew. Now, whatever that meant, we will leave that to biblical scholars to argue over, all right, because there are different ideas what it means. But nonetheless, Hebrews was the first name. That did not lose us because thank you, you have a book in the Bible called the Book of Hebrews. And so when my father, again, this question was really live. When my father went to war, from a good Brooklyn boy winding up, in the Philippines, training to hit Japan, he was called a Heb. All right. I don't know if they meant it, how they meant it, but that was so. But it has its origin back in Genesis. We left that one a long time ago. When Jacob is born and has his children, right? They are called the children of. His name is changed to Israel, so we become the children of Israel. Short term, Israelites. So that'll be another one. Whoever came up to me before with the word, Jew, and she said, well, you were called Judeans. Well, that's true. The next name in history is going to be Judeans because you have in 722, when Assyria destroyed the 10 northern tribes, you have only 2 southern tribes left. The other 10 are really just, gone from history. Don't tell me you found them someplace. You did not. Okay? They were gone. That's what the Assyrians did. They were gone. But 2 were left. 1 assimilated into Judah. So all you have really left are the Judeans. Ergo, you will have the word Jew coming from the word Judeans. So all Jews that have trace some kind of lineage would have to come from the tribe of Judah. That's how we get the name Jew. In modern day, the word, just so we jump to next week and come back quickly, the word Palestinians originally only referred to the Jews. You should know that. When the word Palestinian was used up to May of 1948, it was always the Jews. It was the Palestinians and the Arabs. Okay? The Jerusalem Post was the Palestine Post. So we'll just leave it there for now. And you have, for those who live in Israel, and I'll come back to them in a second also, is the name Israelis. But the word, an Israeli today can be of who are Jewish, who are Christian, who are Muslim, who are Baha'i, and any other groups that you wish to find in Israel, which you will find them. They're all Israelis. Just because you say the word Israeli doesn't mean they're Jewish. Okay, that registered? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, good. Name refers to status, okay? So individuals, going more to the question of what should you call me, or whoever asked the question, what you call us, can be a matter of choice how they want to be called. But a group, and in this case I'm going to talk about Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, the Jewish people. Peoplehood refers to when you have things in common. And this is going to lead a trail to why this is a difficult question. So what do we have in common? You think about America. We have a history. We have a language. For Jews, it can be Hebrew. It can be Aramaic. It can be Yiddish. It can be Ladino. And for Ethiopian Jews, it can be Amharic. So we have at least 5, if not more, languages that are common, that make up a people. Literature makes us common. Bible, rabbinic works, liturgy, and other secular writings. Legal structure. Jews always had their own court structure. It's interesting in the Middle Ages, which gets to the question I will not deal with this year, is usury. All right, when a Jewish court would write a contract in France, it could be used in India, because the same legal procedure was held. It was a unifying legal system, and a document written by one Jewish court would be honored by another. So a legal structure gave a commonality. Values, theology/ideology, a dream of destiny, and lastly, I put geography. Because you can have peoplehood, and we prove it, even when you don't have a strong geographic center. I didn't say no geographic center, just not a strong one. So all these were true for the Jewish group, I'm leaving the word off for the moment, until the 1880s. And in the 1880s, you have several dynamics that occur in Europe. One is going to be the aftermath of the French Revolution. The other is going to be the Enlightenment. The next one will be, in the end of the 1800s, is going to be the migration of the Jews, particularly of Eastern Europe, to the United States and Canada. And these group attributes were either lost in that or given up. You can choose which way. Language. My mother and grandmother spoke Yiddish, but that was the code, so I should know what was going on. And one day my mother turned to me and said, "Don't you understand?" And I said to her, "Why? You never let me." It wasn't supposed to be. And I remember once when my brother and I were able to speak Hebrew at a sufficient amount that we could converse to each other across the dining room table, my father then banged on the table and said, "In front of me, you talk like I should understand it." All right, that was the end of my Hebrew speaking with my brother. But language, I was born speaking English. My granddaughter, of my daughter who lives in Israel, she learns English at home, Hebrew outside, and my son-in-law was born in Russia, and so he speaks Russian to her. She will be trilingual, so I know she's saying something. I have no idea what she's saying. But nonetheless, common language was, in America, most Jews don't know Yiddish. We speak English. And most Jews don't have a great facility in Hebrew, at least not as a spoken language, if we can read it and use it for literature. Literature. That's not held in common. That's not a common bond today, overwhelmingly. Legal structure is gone. I mean, you might want to have a religious document when you get married, but if you don't have a civil one, you're not married. Similarly for divorce. We have documents and not all Jews use these religious documents when they get married or divorced or whatever. Theology, well, that's certainly, that's a whole other subject. And dream of destiny. And certainly geography. So there are many pieces that create peoplehood that say Jews are the Jewish people that really are problematic or changed or lost or given up or not wanted. Jewish identity remained to be based on the following: historical remembrances. One of them is the sentimental memories of Eastern Europe. Fiddler on the Roof. I'd never want to live there like that, but everybody. Okay. Historical remembrances of the Holocaust. Nothing unites Jews as the remembrance of the Holocaust. We have linguistic ability, but it is weak. A knowledge of Jewish literature, but it is weak. Support of Israel has been strong, but in past decades has been splintered. Synagogues, which are more for group dynamics than theology, and communal organizations such as the JCC and the Federation and ADL and things like that. So currently, Jews are separated on how these characteristics play into their individual, their personal, and group identity. This is smorgasbord, take what you want. It's democracy, it's America. Nobody coerces you to be here today. If you don't choose to do these things, you don't do them. I choose not to play golf. I don't play golf. I was a caddy once, it turned me off entirely. I saw these guys lying, friends, lying, cheating, kicking the ball in the top. Choose a sport. When baseball was over for the year, and since we don't get great coverage, and I wouldn't follow the Redskins, I was a Giants fan. Therefore, I have nothing to do till next springtime. The sports section goes right into recycling. But choose that. That's anything you want. Choose to wear a suit. Choose to wear a sport jacket. Choose not to wear either. We're in America. We do what we want, and that goes across the board for everything. Some people stress their Judaic component, and therefore, in the lineup of names, you will have American Jews. Some stress the American component, and they say they are Jewish Americans. And some, which are in the largest growing category for both your group and my group, are called the nuns, N-O-N-E. And though they come out of us, they do not identify with us. Yeah, I used to commend to you the Pew reports, P-E-W. You should follow them, look at them very interestingly. For mainstream Christianity and mainstream Judaism, it's the same factors. Traditional faith of Judaism always maintain a mixture of the elements of Jewish nationhood. A stress on the knowledge of Jewish religious texts, a common bond between all Jews, that they need to take care of each other. That kind of services with everybody, but it's particularly in the traditional family part. A dream of a common destiny, namely the ingathering of the Jewish exiles to the land of Israel. Support strongly the reestablishment of Jewish independence there. Support strongly the religious nature of the state of Israel, which is a source of modern tension within Israel, between Israelis, and between Israelis and with Jews of the diaspora. And lastly, in the traditional faith, that Zionism is understood as part of Jewish messianism. Messianism is not dead in Judaism. It still exists very strongly, but some of them see Zionism with that prism. Using traditional liturgy is sometimes difficult for Jews to pray using traditional liturgy because it embodies and espouses the traditional Jewish dream of the ingathering of the diaspora and the centrality of the land of Israel and of Jerusalem, which is not in harmony with their theology or ideology. There are Jews, just as a sideline, because in November is also celebrating when the Balfour Declaration was issued. The Balfour Declaration was the original phraseology was, of the land of Israel, a Jewish state. The British Jews of Britain did not believe in that, did not believe in the reestablishment of a Jewish state. And they lobbied against the Balfour Declaration. And it became changed to, in Palestine, a Jewish state. Significantly changing what the vision of the Balfour Declaration was. Little words mean a big thing. Not only now, but then too. So Jews have a split screen about what they feel. I would dare say that if you took a poll of American Jews today and say, how many intend, think of, dream of moving to the land of Israel, you will not get a very strong response in the broad part of the Jewish people out of America, of the Jews of America, but you will get a very strong response within the traditional part of the community, which is a major source of people who make immigration to Israel today. There were many revisions of Reform and Reconstructionist movements and their liturgy concerning the centrality of Israel. The Reform went to one extreme, as I just mentioned, and moved back to a more middle posture. The Reconstructionist mirrors the Reform. And the conservative movement, where I come from, maintained a vision of the reestablishment of the Jewish state, along with the value of the diaspora to bring Jewish teachings to the world, but without missionizing. I needed to put that in there someplace. So how to get to the end of this long string of how should you call us? My fast answer is know your customer. Most Jews in America are very proud to be identified as Jewish and as American. Born here, being loyal and patriotic, we do not see nor foresee a challenge between that and our support for Israel. Others will be more private. Each has their individual and personal motivations. To the noun Jew, or to the adjective, which is often used as a noun, Jewish, though that's an adjective. It's very honorable to call us either, and it makes us proud. So that's my presentation to the question. I'll quickly take any questions you want to ask about it that I just said. Yes?
You mentioned that Yiddish is, that your mother and grandmother spoke, but that you didn't. Is there more of a cultural movement to bring Yiddish back in certain?
Not there's part of the Orthodox world, not the modern Orthodox world, but the more Hasidic world, that part of the spectrum, where they see themselves in terms of society as much more isolationist, and therefore one way to do that is Yiddish. So they do speak Yiddish strongly, but that's a very small segment. When before, the immigrant generation all spoke Yiddish. My four grandparents all spoke Yiddish. Their descendants, none of them. So there is a place where they try to save our old books. And one of the things, I once said to my mother, and I can say it again, I really wish they had included me to know Yiddish. At least I could have read it, even if I couldn't speak it.
I mean, that would be my thought if you're speaking about literature being lost, if you have books that are in Yiddish, you would hope that there would still be people to speak it.
Now I hope people who translate it.
Yeah.
I have to know. I mean, I'm born speaking English. I'm born in Brooklyn, grew up in New Jersey, came back to Manhattan for school, and I've served in a whole bunch of states being as a rabbi. I speak English. That's my language. I started learning Hebrew in Hebrew school, but it was more as a reading thing, and my fluency was really bad. I couldn't speak it worth anything. I went to Israel for my undergrad year of study, made some really stupid mistakes, and left it after the year speaking very, very well. Came back to America. My speaking capacity diminished. I went back in '73, had to crank it all over again. I left doing very well. I haven't lived, I've lived there in spurts, so my Hebrew kind of my ear takes a while to readjust as I've gotten older, and they speak faster. So that's it. I need to know Aramaic for my rabbinic work, and at that point I stop. I can't handle another language. If I was learning it from birth, and you're hearing it naturally, like my granddaughter's learning 3 languages, I could have done it. Yes?
Could you unpack a little more slowly the distinction you were drawing about British Jews being opposed to the Balfour Declaration as it was originally stated?
The real issue was, and it was for the Jews of Germany too, but the Balfour Declaration was done in England, so that's where this showed up very strongly. Not all Jews wanted the recreation of a national homeland. Mm-hmm. They saw themselves, in Germany they said, we are Jews of the Jewish persuasion. Didn't save them after World War II when the Nazis came. But they wanted to see themselves as Germans, and so they were all Germans, we're all Americans. Some are Presbyterians, some are Catholics, some are Episcopalians, some are Methodists, some are Jews, some are Muslims. We're all Americans, and we have one specialty, but we get rid of the things that make us really different. For Jews, that was kosher, keeping Sabbath, okay, circumcision, a whole bunch of things. They wanted to blend in and be like everybody else. I grew up that our front lawn had to looked just as nice as everybody on the block. We were the only Jewish family for many, many blocks, but we looked like everybody else. They were very upset when my father took down 2 trees on either side of the porch, which our previous owners used to put Christmas lights on. And I put a humidor in the window. Did not go over. But there were people who did not see the necessity to recapitulate the Jewish people as a people on their homeland, and actively fought against it. And then where we see it theologically, it was fought in Germany in the 1830s, 1840s. It was fought by the Reform movement, the creation of the Reform movement then, and it was fought here in America in the early 1900s by the Reform movement as well. And when the Balfour Declaration was being brought forth in Britain, the British Jews part of them fit into that place. There are Jews of America today who also do not see the necessity and see themselves exclusively as Americans with no need for their Jewish component to have a state of Israel. Yes?
This is sort of tied in with it, the Balfour plus the Zionism. Tell me, I've seen a picture of Prime Minister Netanyahu wanting to declare Israel as a Zionist state, and also the Balfour Declaration. Can you show me at all? I've had trouble with this for years. I've never seen anything that's introduced God into the formula of creating Israel itself. It's all man-made, so to speak.
Mostly true. No, mostly true. I'm not sure what else we're going to do this morning. Let's see how we start this off. By the 1800s, ignoring for the moment the situation of Jews in the Arab lands, which I cannot ignore, but I have to for the moment. In the aftermath of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment, the Jews of Central and Western Europe had the ability to enter into mainstream life. That's a big loss, but it's a generalization that's true. Jews for the first time could attend university, they could get into other occupations, they could own land, depending on where and when. You have for the first time that you could leave the ghetto and be part of mainstream society to different degrees. The price to be paid was to give up language, to give up the law structure that tied everybody together, to give up what was particular, it made them particular and apart. Okay? If you drive by the corner of West Franklin and Malvern, you wouldn't know that I'm on one of those corners. My house looks like everybody else's house. But how I live my life, what's inside my house, how I eat, what I will do or not do on Sabbath, makes me different, makes me particular. It's how my faith is expressed. The other part of my life is like yours. I've worked with Caritas in my synagogue. We give to charity for kids without coats and all these other things. We do lots of things together, similar, if not from the same organizations. Eastern Europe didn't have that. From Poland, depending where in Hungary, etc., or Austria to the west, but to the Eastern Europe, which was the bulk of Jewry, they did not have the impact of the Enlightenment, of the French Revolution, of liberté, égalité, fraternité, didn't exist. And so the Pale of Settlement, which stretched as a huge corridor from north to south, where my family comes from, and all for my grandparents, did not have the liberalizing experience. And in fact, in the 1880s, the pogroms in Russia and Poland and Eastern Europe were particularly terrible. The history of this goes back over centuries, and I do want to do some of that next week. So I'm going to leave it there, but I'm just going to refer to it this much. Do not watch Fiddler on the Roof and think things all were rosy and glorious. And in fact, the film shows, the movie, the play, everything, everybody kept singing all the nice little tunes, but it was really, for me, a very difficult presentation. It showed several things. One of them was there was the pogrom scene. I don't know if you realized what you were watching. There was a pogrom. I taught this to the school near Bethel, and I forget the name of the girl, St. Gertrude's, I think it was. They put it on, and then they asked me to come teach about this because they had no idea what they were doing. And I said, do you know you're putting on a pogrom? They looked at me and went white, all right? Because it was neat, it was clean, it was no bloodshed. That was not true. How did Jews avoid the worst of the pogroms? They did one of two things. That was shown in a way in the movie. Namely, they paid off. They paid off. And so they had to make a slight disturbance, and they got paid off, and that ended it. Or they had to leave. That's why the end of the movie is Anatevka. They have to leave Anatevka. It was either get slaughtered, pay off, or run. In 1870-something, I wish I could prepare dates. I don't do these sorts of things well. Was the Dreyfus trial. in France. In France, this is after the French Revolution, after Enlightenment, Dreyfus is accused, he's a French officer, he's accused of selling secrets to whom? The Germans. This is going to turn into a history test real quick, guys. Okay? He is framed. And he is found guilty in court. He is stripped of his epaulets and his sword is broken. And what happens next is the crowds rage wild in Paris saying, "Death to the Jews." Anybody wants to know more about that? I'm sure you can Google this and find lots of it all you want. This is what happened. Later on, Emile Zola is going to raise this as a big case, and there'll be a retrial, and God knows what. He is sent to Devil's Island, or whatever he was sent to in exile, and the mobs ran crazy. The person who saw this was, who saw this? His name was Theodor Herzl. He was a correspondent for a newspaper from Vienna, and he saw this and he realized that we know what's going on in Eastern Europe. But if this is what's happening in France, there is no hope for the Jews of Europe. There's just no hope. He wasn't really conversant with America, so he left us off on the other side of the world. But he's thinking about where the bulk of Jews are. There were not that many Jews in America in the 1800s, relatively speaking. So he came up with this proposal called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, to recreate, in the place where the Jews came from, which was still fairly empty, the Jewish home. And he created the Zionist movement. This was part of the ancient dream, that's what I put it in there, the dream of destiny of the Jewish people, which I also put in the Messianic piece I did last spring, namely that the regathering of the exiles to the land of Israel. It is part of Judaism. The traditional part of Judaism never took it out, and for a while the Reform and Reconstructionists did take it out. Some have put it back in, and the conservative movement left it in as well. Part of the religious dream was this restoration of the ingathering of the exiles. And we end Yom Kippur with it, we end the Seder with it, and it's all other places as well. Inside daily liturgy, etc. So Zionism was seen as part of the messianic redemption of the Jewish people, because remember that I said last year for the Messiah, I'm overlapping subjects, that for the Messiah, part of the issue for Judaism is the ingathering of the Jewish people. So Zionism was seen by some as a religious issue. That will be the traditionalists. Most of them don't follow that, and they stay in Europe and they die in the Holocaust because their religious leadership said, when the Messiah comes, then we'll go back, and if the Messiah hasn't come, we're not going, we will wait for the Messiah. They waited, and that's what happened. The non-religious were going to leave Eastern Europe, and they were either going to come here, like my grandparents, or they were going to go build the state of Israel. And so in the 1880s, you have the first organized groups of Jews going back from Eastern Europe called the Bilu, B-I-L-U, for their initials, Beit Yaakov L'chuven Elcha, the house of Jacob, let us go up, and they come and they start rebuilding. They're the first people who create kibbutzim and things like that in the 1880s. And so Zionism was either secular messianism or religious messianism. It was messianism for the Jewish people of one sort or another, which was to save our necks and get us to a place of freedom and where we wouldn't be killed. Did I answer the question? I hope so. Yes?
I'm not a historian, but my recollection of the Balfour Resolution and the British, the people who occupied Israel prior to the Balfour Resolution, the British tanks came in and just moved them out, and
The British defeated the Turks in World War I.
is that the
That's before the Balfour Declaration. It's part of the very complicated history of the first decades of the 20th century, between the British, the Italians, and the French all wanting slices of the Middle East. And in the aftermath of the World War I, when the British defeated the Turks, they get the mandate of the League of Nations, and the British during World War I issue this the Balfour Declaration, and it's all part of the split up of the middle. But it didn't mean anything until the British defeated the Turks. That's where Allenby and Lawrence of Arabia, all of that kind of fits into that time frame.
I guess I'm asking about the Palestinians who lived there and they were moved out by the British?
No.
That's not right?
No. As I say no, is that one person, someone here, someone there, but nobody was moved wholesale out of any place. We're going to answer just to the question of time frame you're asking. I'm going to say just straight out no. That did not happen.
So total population numbers, it's 150 million Jews in the world today.
Not in my dreams. At the beginning of World War II, a census taken, not in the way we take census in America today, but pretty accurate, and everybody accepts these numbers, was about 18 million. Lock, stock, and barrel.
Global.
Global. Okay? Global. We don't have a great count of the Jews. I mean, nobody knew about the Jews of Ethiopia, but there are not that many, comparatively speaking. Or, we didn't have a great hand on the feeling of North Africa at the time, but they had information of Jewish numbers in different places. There were Jews in India, there were Jews scattered around, so they did some best guessing from they knew. We did have a better corporate structure because of synagogues and things like that. Federations didn't really exist yet. You're using basically numbers from religious sources. But the best guess is 18 million. If we had 18 and a half, I'm stretching, no more than that. At the end of World War II, it is 11 million. And just because World War II ended in April of 45 doesn't mean the dying stopped of European Jewry. And after the war ended, and some Jews that remained tried to go back to where they came from, there were then pogroms in 1946 in Europe, which fueled the need of Jews to get someplace because they couldn't stay where they were. We didn't learn this in high school. I didn't learn about DP camps for Jews in high school. Displaced person camps, that's what DP stands for. I buried a man. He was head of our federation. He was a member of my congregation. And he was one of the American officers responsible for handling the DP camps in Europe when the war ended. And most people didn't know that, but I learned that as he was passing, and then when he died from his family, and then I saw the articles about him. What did you do with people that were in concentration camps? And we had a problem in America. What did you do with the Japanese that we interned? And they always said, okay, no, we're not going to keep you interned. But how do you handle this? Somebody has to take care of this. So,
with Judaism and Christianity being our God, being the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so forth, why is Judaism passed down through the maternal line?
I'm not going to leave it for another time. I'll answer. We're not getting any of these things today. Okay. Okay. Well, not a chance. We really have to deal with a person named Ezra. Ezra in the Bible. All right? Because when he came from Babylonia, he was part of the exiles after the destruction of Solomon's temple in 586, and he comes back in the 400s before the Common Era. He is meeting a community that is in dissolution. He is meeting a community that is intermarrying with the people around them and losing their corporate identity. And therefore he declares that identity is being passed down through the matrilineal line. Before that it was patrilineal.
Why?
Because you know who the mother is. Very clear. This is not being cute or anything else. You know, the influence, the mother's influence for the child and for home is historic. This is nothing new to be cute and say that today. It is clear, I will acknowledge that when I was out working as rabbi, my wife had a bigger impact on our children than I did. I had impact. My kids, when I retired, my kids put together a collection of my sermons. They published it, by the way. And what was really unique is that my children wrote their annotations to my sermons. There are about 15 sermons in the book. It's on Amazon or wherever you Google these things. And they wrote their, I did not know my children. It was fascinating to me, did I really write that stuff? And the other was to read what my children thought of it. I never realized how much they listened and how much they thought about what I wrote. For me, it blew me out of the water. I sat there just stunned to read what they wrote on it. But I know how much influence my wife had as compared to what I had, and control of the situations day by day for the children. It shaped them in certain ways more than I did. And Ezra understood that. And therefore Ezra declared there and then, through how he handled the situation, that it turned into matriarchal consent. In today's world, being so complex and complicated, you have, and facing in a sense, a time not so different from Ezra, you have, in the Reform movement, they acknowledge patriarchal as well as matriarchal, which puts some of us who do not into awkward situations when you have a couple coming to you and they want to get married and it's a mess. But that's the answer to the question. Okay, did I exhaust everything for the moment?
Don't ask.
I will try in the shortest of time. So I'm not going to tell you what happens when you die, and I'm not going to tell you about grace. But she said goodnight to George. See, I know who laughs and who doesn't laugh. You have no idea what I just said. Goodnight, George. Goodnight, Grace. You have no idea. Messiah. I'm going to try to run with this one as fast as I can and try to nail down the pieces that you want to know.
You have 7 minutes.
I got 7 on that. That's what I just looked. Messiah began as a concept that was secular, not religious. It referred to the King of Israel, because the word limshoch, which is the Hebrew word from which Mashiach comes from, means to pour. So the pour-e, the one who got poured on, was the Mashiach. That's how the Hebrew switches from the doer to the who got done to. And so the King of Israel was poured on oil for his anointing. And you know that story because Samuel did it to David. Okay, so go find that in 2 Samuel or 1 Samuel. One of the Samuels, it's there. Okay? And so there was no eschatological, there was no at the end of time issues concerning this. Mashiach was to be the King of Israel. Human, he ruled, it was David, it was Solomon. Solomon's son was Rehoboam. He messed up royally and didn't listen about the issue of taxation. If you want to study taxes in the Bible, go there, go to that story. And after him, the kingdom split, etc. And so you have a lineage of the southern kings in Jerusalem, Mashiach, and then you have the northern kings. They're all in the Bible, and they get destroyed by Assyria, and the only ones left. And so the lineage of David, and his promise by God to David that this is going to descend through his house, they're all anointed, they're all the Mashiach. What does the king have to do? The king has to protect Israel. When the Jews are scattered, he has to bring them back. When the temple was destroyed, he has to rebuild it. This is a human king. This is a human Messiah. It has nothing to do with religious terminology. It is never divine. It is never divine. The problem is, and I'm skipping this to 7 minutes, is that when it comes to the time of the Romans, the issue of a human king being able to take care of this situation, defeat the Romans, because they're controlling Judea, is impossible. And you have, as a correlative to the human king, you have the concept that is created of divine, somehow connected to divine. Not that human becomes divine and divine becomes human, but somehow the term Mashiach is going to move from the locus of the human king to some other person who can achieve this. And so you have the issue of Mashiach being separated, in a sense, in order to effect the Jewish freedom from Rome, ingathering of the exiles that still exist from the Babylonian dispersion, and Jewish autonomy in the land of Israel. It is not yet connected to anything eschatological. There were, as I said last spring, huge numbers of different groups of Jews, Pharisees, Essenes, Sadducees, the Dead Sea people, whomever they were, we're not sure. You had zealots, you had lots of different groups. And some of them had more extreme views on these matters than others did. Some of them left Jerusalem, the Dead Sea people left Jerusalem, turned their back on the entirety of that society and wrote their own, that's the Dead Sea Scrolls. But you have other things that come into play. At this period of time, it was a great percolation of things. One is going to be the concept of the end of days, Acharit HaYamim, which is mentioned just in passing in the prophets. They really don't have a great focus on this. They leave it for God to worry about a long time from now, but it's not. But there is a concept that is existing. It's also existing more as a nationalistic term, is the concept of resurrection. Okay, you did not invent it, I must tell you. I did. Okay, okay. It's Ezekiel. It's one of mine, guys. Valley of the dry bones. All right. In that, just read it. The bone comes to bone, everything, and then God breathes into him, breathes into them. All right. That's the Jewish nation arising from exile. All right. That's a resurrection, Chiyat HaMeitim, resurrection of the dead, which will occur at the end of times. And this has a messianism. Forget what I said before about Zionism. Leave that on the side for the moment. It's all there, but leave that there. This is religious messianism. And all of these ideas are percolating. You see at the end of the book of Daniel. You see it in Ezekiel. This is written for the diaspora. He is a priest in Jerusalem. He is exiled in 586. And he writes his book, his prophecies, for the exiles in Babylon. Jeremiah, of the same period, goes to Egypt instead. So you have all of these ideas percolating around. Jesus knows them all. Jesus is a good Jewish boy. I was doing this before with whomever we were talking. All right? He's born in either wherever he wants to be born, Judea. He comes from Nazareth, Nazareth, and he is living in these very percolating times, and so are his students. He is, like many people in his time, a leader of a sort. I don't know how to typify it. He has students, followers. He's not the only one of this nature, but one that will then last into history. He dies, and the temple is still standing, while all these ideas are percolating. The temple is destroyed in the year 70 CE, Common Era. And then comes the second revolt against Rome, on 132 CE. At this point in time, messianism is all the Jews have left in terms of dream of a destiny. This Messiah now is totally religious and left off for God to yearn for, and left for God to take care of, to do, and will stay in our liturgy and in other religious literature to this very day. But for Judaism, Jesus did not fulfill any of the pieces of the puzzle for Judaism's definition of Messiah. Because after his death is worse than it was during his lifetime. He dies in the 20s or 30s CE, and after him, the temple will be destroyed. Jerusalem will be destroyed. The Jews will be exiled, not totally in 70 as it will be later, but exiled. They are, and then the second revolt in 133, they are totally, not totally, there's always Jews living in the land of Israel, but a significant now are gone. Jewish locus is going to move from Jerusalem along the seacoast to Caesarea, up to Tzfat, Safed in the north, down to Tiberias, till when it finally will end, and the schools will be extinguished in the 400s of the Common Era, CE. And Jewish dispersion now is worse than ever before. And powerlessness is the definition of the Jewish people, which I'm just going to just swing over 1 second. What makes 1948 for the Jewish people so powerful as a date, and the state of Israel so powerful, is because from 586 in the first dispersion, which with Cyrus the Great, whatever reason, allowed us to come back, which not everybody did. But from the year 70 and from 132, powerlessness and the threat of extinction was the name of the game for Jewish existence. And what I said before in terms of Fiddler on the Roof, that was either to pay off or flee. Most times Jews fled until you ran out of a place to run to. So Israel became the place where, if we're going to make our last stand, well, this is where it's going to be, because it's the only place we can fight to defend ourselves. I am convinced personally, if we didn't fight the Romans, there was a peace group amongst the Jews of 70, led by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that if they'd listened to him and didn't revolt against Rome, well, I wouldn't be standing and talking to you today, because the exile wouldn't have happened. I don't know what Judaism would have been like if the temple still stood. We took animals and all kinds of things to sacrifice. I don't know what would have been. But I do know that we wouldn't have been dispersed to the world, and I wouldn't have had a Holocaust. Take your choice about what ifs of history. But for this quick lineup, Jesus did not fit the Jewish description of messianism, and therefore Christianity would then eventually develop from his students. And Judaism would continue to develop from the rabbis. And you're here, and I'm here, and I'm done. Thank you very much.